It's been an unsettling year. Over the last year, we've had so much to deal with. One major thing, of course, has been the coronavirus. For us personally, we live in Los Angeles, our kids live in New York City, and we've lived in large metropolitan areas where there have been hospitals overflowing with patients and doctor's office overrun with coronavirus patients. Everyone seems unsettled. Last week we were on a flight for the first time in a long time. We took a flight on Southwest Airlines. And I noticed when the flight attendants were giving their spiel, they had this new line in their spiel. And what they said was, if your neighbor is doing something that's disrupting you, please let us know so we can help you out. So even flight attendants are feeling like they need to help settle the crowds that are on the plane. And in our local area, our school board, some of our parents are suing our school board because of online education, and they're concerned that their kids spend all day online, which is, of course, concerning. But I heard one father talk, and he talked about the fact that his child was not only online on school all day long, but he was also watching violent video games and online all night too. And I just thought, we're so unsettled. This parent doesn't even feel he has any control about how to help his child get away from so much online activity. I'm Sharon Hargrave, and I'm the Executive Director of the Boone Center for the Family at Pepperdine University. And this is my husband, Dr. Terry Hargrave, and he's a professor in the Marriage and Family Therapy program at Fuller Theological Seminary. And today we're going to just talk to you a little bit about the issue of when conflict unsettles everyone.
You know, Sharon, when you start talking about the idea of conflict unsettling people, I think that really we're better off by calling it really by its proper name, is that people are afraid. People are just simply unsafe. You know, when Sharon and I work with people, we really look for three keys around safety. And one of those is predictability. You know, people show up at the same way and the same attitudes and the same kind of recognizability. There's a predictability of schedule. There's a predictability of how society is going to behave. And of course, all those things have gone totally out of the window over this last year and a half. The direction in terms of when we're finding out about COVID, the idea of, well, do we wear masks? Do we not wear masks? Do we wipe down our groceries? Do we not? Is it safe to gather outside versus inside? I mean, it's just enormous amount of unpredictable information, and changing that information has made us feel unsafe. But of course, it's not just with COVID. It's also the fallout from the economic problems that we've had, the problems that we've had with jobs, the problems that we've had with even knowing what it means to be a community of believers and coming together or not being able to come together. All those have made it terribly unpredictable and make us feel unsafe, and we become frightened. Another thing is the idea of openness, that vulnerability and being open with one another to be able to share each other's burdens. We live at a time where that kind of withdrawal of having to quarantine more, having to be more separated, not being used to our surroundings any longer that have been regular and dependable, has led us to be less vulnerable with one another. I think this openness even spills over to the idea that we're so afraid to offend anyone that we say nothing to anyone. And that, of course, builds in separation between people and makes it more fearful, more unsafe for individuals. And finally, this big last issues that I just think that we have seldom lived through a time where it has been a bigger issue, and that is justice. If you're going to feel safe, you have to feel like things are fair. And things, fairness and justice is more like a balance of give and take. What we know is that socially, ethnically, culturally, economically, all these factors have added up to say there is an imbalance in our society. And if you're not a victim of that imbalance of being cheated in our society, then chances are you feel like there's a possibility that somebody is trying to take something from me or is taking something from me in the meantime. That sense of injustice leads to a lot of destructive behavior. And I think that we have lived in a time where the injustice, which is the drive for justice is a good thing, the injustice has driven people to do many, many destructive things, which of course makes us feel unsafe.
Yeah, I think that's true. And the only thing I would add to what you're saying is this whole idea of truth. We don't know what the truth is anymore. So when we think about openness and honesty and people are saying one thing and then we think, is that true or is that not true? It's not even based sometimes on the relationship as much as it's just based on everybody is even questioning truth. So what we wanted to do today is we wanted to give you some tips or some ideas in your church, in your organization, with your staff, with your family, that can help you know how to handle well when everybody is feeling so unsettled because of all the conflict that's going on. The first thing I think I would say, do you feel unsettled yourself? It's hard to help other people settle when we feel unsettled ourselves. And one thing I would encourage you to think about if you're thinking about, well, I don't know, am I unsettled? There's some things I would look for if I were you. One is, am I overly busy? Am I running all the time? Am I always trying to solve a problem? You know, I think coronavirus has been especially difficult on church leaders, organizational leaders, because at the beginning we had to pivot and we had to change and we had to do things new in order to connect to the people that we work and serve. And now, as we're coming out of it, it's the same thing. Do I have an indoor service? Do I have an outdoor service? Do we have masks? Do we not have masks? There's so much going on that we can get so busy trying to solve all these problems that we just give off unsettledness. We give off this idea that we're not settled ourselves because we're running from thing to thing. The next thing is, are you constantly on your technology? Are you constantly looking at your cell phone? Are you constantly trying to be updated? We're really finding the devastating effects of people who try to calm themselves by information on their technology. And so I'd encourage you to say, I'm going to go this whole morning without technology. I'm going to leave my cell phone in my office and I'm going to go to my meetings and I'm just going to experience being with other people and see how well you do in staying away from the busyness of always looking at my phone. Another thing would be, are you feeling burned out? Are you feeling negative? Are you feeling that you just don't have the ability to get through the day? This would be a strong sense that you're not feeling settled in who you are and settled in your mission and settled in your role. Because all of us in this time have too much to get done, to get it done well, and to like everything we do because everything is constantly changing. And for that reason, I would like you to see the Boone Center for the Family as a resource. We have a program called Relate Strong, and in the program of Relate Strong, we help people self-regulate. We help people learn how to deal with anxiety and depression and this feeling of unsettledness. So I would encourage you to call us or reach out to us in some way to talk to us individually, but to say, I am feeling unsettled, and because I am feeling unsettled, I know the people that I lead and serve are not feeling settled either. So I think it's a big first step to say, am I unsettled myself?
One of the things, Sharon, that I was thinking about while you were speaking is the idea of the tendency of our society right at this time and this place to attach our identity to our opinions, and how fruitless that is to attach our identity to our opinions, because we start holding that our beliefs are somehow more important than our personhood. And when we start doing that to ourselves, that I stand for a certain political party, or I stand for the idea that we have to have complete freedom over all the decisions that we make, or we're not free at all. When you start attaching yourself to those types of opinions, you forget who you are, and you have a tendency to forget who the other is also. The reality is that we are much, much deeper than our opinions. We can differ in terms of what we think, in terms of belief, but when we start tying our identity to it, it seems like it becomes a fight or die issue. That if you as a family member have a different opinion than I do, then I can't have anything to do with you, because somehow it makes me feel bad about myself, and certainly makes me angry at you. I think it's very, very important that we realize that our identities come from the way that we are loved. When we're loved by people for our uniqueness and our skills and our talents and our gifting, when we're loved in such a way that says they just like to be around us because we're good and wholesome friends, and then when we're loved because we're really worthy of sacrifice. This is one of the things that ties us together as a body of believers, is that we have a common lover who sacrificed everything for us that we could become one. The way that we are loved is where our identity is. And when we get in touch with how deeply we're loved, we're actually much, much more likely to start loving others the way that they deserve to be loved, and not based on the idea that you have to have the same opinion or belief that I do.
So, different can be good?
Different is absolutely necessary for the body of Christ. And even though we know that, we've come to tie our identities more to what we think than who we are.
I think I really appreciate you bringing up that point, because I think even just if I'm in a conversation with somebody that has a different opinion than I do, and I feel strongly about my opinion, I start to feel myself be unsettled. And we have to learn how to sit in differences with other people. I also think we really want to learn how to empower people. We want to help people understand and know that they can make a difference. I think we feel, I don't know what the word is, I think we feel really powerless sometimes in the situations that we're in. So if we're in a situation that we feel like there's nothing we can do about this, it's really unsettling. And one thing that we believe is all of us, no matter what the situation, no matter what the circumstance, have some kind of power. I mean, even if you've read stories about people that survived being in concentration camps or solitary confinement and prisoners of war, they will tell you what they did, maybe even just mentally, to help them look forward to life after the time of confinement they were in. They will tell you about mind games they did with themselves to begin to understand how they were going to survive this terrible situation. In the situations where you have the least possible power like that, you still have choice. I know Terry and I, when we moved to Southern California, we moved into what's called a transitional neighborhood. And in our transitional neighborhood, it was not uncommon for us to wake up in the morning and have tagging graffiti on our sidewalks, on the auto body shop across the street from us. And it made us feel really unsafe and kind of powerless. But as we began to think about, okay, what can we do, because we love this house and we love this neighborhood, what can we do to make things feel better? And so what we did was we began to reach out to our neighbors, to talk to them about doing a neighborhood watch program. We began to search out security systems. So we put a security system on our house to help us feel safe when we were at home. And those were things that we could do. And I would tell you that in this time and in this place, now we feel very safe and very comfortable in our home, even though the neighborhood has changed somewhat, but it hasn't changed a lot since we first moved in. So if somebody comes to you as their church leader or as their colleague and they say, I just feel so anxious all the time, I really encourage you to take some time to sit with them, to say, what are you feeling anxious about? Because a lot of times I think people don't name the issue that they're afraid of. And if you can help them think through what it is that's causing them to feel unsettled, and then you can say, okay, what are some ideas of what we can do about this? Really empowering people to make change in situations where they feel unsettled is really helpful to them.
One of the things that an old seminary professor used to say to us that is a maxim of the Methodist faith is the idea that it's easier to act yourself into a new way of feeling than feel yourself into a new way of acting. One of the things that strikes me about what you're saying, Sharon, is that the idea of empowerment, of really empowering yourself to do what you can do, really means that you stop thinking about it so much and analyzing your feelings, but instead really moving yourself to some kind of action to say, how do I take care of making connections with people? How do I move to make myself feeling safer in the midst of a global pandemic? One of the things that we know that is really important in the framework of helping yourself feeling more settled, more safe, is the idea that you're not alone. You really need people who understand what's going on. You know, Sharon and I both are marriage and family therapists. We work with many, many people over the years, and particularly people that have had enormous losses in their lives. And, you know, in many ways, the worst kind of loss that many people can conceive of is the loss of a child. And we've worked with parents that have lost children before, and a common theme that we always hear is, no one can understand how I feel. And certainly there's an aspect of that none of us can fathom the personal love that a parent has for a child. But at the same time, there are many people that have walked that difficult walk of losing people, and particularly losing children. And even though somebody can't understand exactly how I feel, they are still in my same zip code. They can understand enough of what I feel to walk with me, to talk with me, to not necessarily tell me what to do, but to be with me during a difficult time. One of the things that I think we've missed in this global pandemic and this such polarization that has gone in our society, both politically and emotionally, is that we've lost touch with just being around others who know what this is like. My goodness, you know, when we think about this, all of us feel unsafe to some degree. All of us feel anxiety to some degree. And if we understand that that others do understand, we actually start moving a little closer to them instead of isolating ourselves further away. We do better in an unsafe world when we are together. Moving toward one another is better than moving apart.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to think about, is this whole idea of the fact that we are not alone, because I don't know, Terry, if you can help me. Part of it is we actually have been alone sometimes during this pandemic. If we're not married, or if we don't live with our family, or even Terry and I as a couple have not seen our friends. We've not been out for social events. We've not been gathering at our church. So this whole concept that says you're not alone, when in actuality we kind of have been physically alone, I think as church leaders, it's very powerful to begin to communicate with the people that you lead and serve or in your organization that we're kind of not alone in our being alone, is that everybody's having the same experience. I think sometimes we believe that no one else is having my experience of aloneness that I've experienced during this time. And I think church leaders can help by helping people communicate to each other, okay, what has this aloneness time been like for you? What kinds of things have you experienced? And have people share those things. And then I think they'll be thinking, wow, I've been alone, but I haven't been alone in how I feel or how I've experienced this thing, because everybody else in my group or small group or the people I work with, everybody else is experiencing the same thing. At Pepperdine, there's been an encouragement of those of us that are supervisors to take time frequently with the people that are on our staff, as we've all been working at home, to take time with the people on our staff to say, how are you doing? As we're Zooming in our Zoom meetings and we're all in our separate homes, how are you doing? What's this week been like? What things are you experiencing? And I think we need to take time to do that. Slower is better. Taking time to hear people's story is really a powerful way to help people connect when they feel alone. I know as leaders, oftentimes we feel like I just don't have time for one more story. I just don't have time to connect to one more person. But I think if you do take time to slow down and to connect, oftentimes then that person will feel more refreshed, then they can go refresh other people. So I don't know if you have any additional thoughts about this idea of helping people feel not alone when we have been alone.
Well, I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier in terms of empowering yourself to do something rather than doing nothing. This tendency that naturally has forced us into isolation, more isolation, it has a tendency to say, well, somebody's got to come out there and find me, like a lifeguard on the side has got to find me by myself because I'm all alone. Actually, it's not exactly like that. We can empower ourselves to do something, even though we maybe can't be in each other's presence on a weekly basis, or maybe we can't speak face to face, or maybe we can't go do an activity together. There are ways that we can work around that, empower ourselves. My gosh, wouldn't that be strange to actually receive a card or letter from somebody where you actually feel that kind of, what would it be like to, over a Zoom meeting, actually recounting some of the good times that we've had in the activities that we've had in the past that binds our hearts together once again. In other words, don't wait for somebody to come out and get you. You need to be the lifeguard to go and find somebody, and that's a cure to your own aloneness.
Yeah, and that reminds me of one more tip, our idea about aloneness that Dr. Kelly Hare, one of my colleagues at the Boone Center, suggested even pulling out old picture albums and looking at pictures of times in the past where you've been with groups of people or been with other people can really be helpful in kind of fighting this aloneness that we felt. Another tip is to help people understand and see that difficult times develop character. Now, I've been preparing for this week, this talk, and I actually was listening to a podcast the other day of a guy who'd been through an extremely difficult time in his life. And he said, the worst thing people would say to me is that If it doesn't kill you, it'll make you better. He said that was the worst feedback that anybody gave me when I was going through a hard time. So I had to stop and think about this tip, and I had to think, how do we help people see that in actuality, hard times, difficult times do produce character? I think one way that's really helpful to do that with other people is, again, hear their story, is to say to them something like, tell me about another difficult time that you went through, and how did you handle it? What did you use to get through that time when you had a hard time? Instead of just being, saying, oh, this will make you stronger, say, tell me about a time that a hard time did make you stronger, and what did you learn from that particular hard time? I was thinking about this today. I was thinking about a hard time that I had professionally in my life. There was a time that I took on a new job, and in that job I was taking on, I was going to be heading up an organization that had been through a really difficult time. And as I stepped into that position, they'd been without somebody in leadership for a while, and as I stepped into that position, I knew that being without a leader was a problem, but I didn't realize the extent to the problems. And my first year in that job was probably one of the hardest times of my professional life, because I felt inadequate to pull together the pieces of this problem, and the employees that I had inherited also had issues, and as I began to work out some of those issues that seemed very common to me, like coming to work all the time was not something that they'd been in the habit of doing in this interim time period. And as I began to work out those issues with those people, they weren't liking the fact that I was making changes too. So I felt really incompetent, and I felt really alone. Terry was my cheerleader during that time, and there were two things he told me. One was, you don't have to stay in this job, which was really helpful, that I didn't feel trapped. But the second thing he told me was, you can do this. I believe in you. You can do this. And because of his support, and because I think of the grace of God, and because of a lot of conversations I had with myself that I could do this and that I would be okay, I stayed in that job. And when I look back at that time in my career, at this time now, I think it was one of the best experiences of my professional life. Now, Scripture in Romans 5 tells us that when we go through difficult times, that sufferings produce endurance, endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And as I look at that, I think, how does a difficult time produce hope? And if I take that one example in my life of this time, that the first year of that job, I thought I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But because of Terry's support and because of prayer, I lasted through it, and because it became such an amazing experience. Now, when I step into a difficult time, I can feel a sense of hope, because I can feel like, Sharon, if you'll work on this, if you'll see what you need to do differently, if you'll pray, if you'll listen to the Spirit, if you'll walk through this difficult time, it will make you better. And it did, and it has, and I am better because of it. So I think this whole idea and how we share with other people, the idea of how character builds hope, is really important in these days and times that says, what are we going to learn from the coronavirus? What are we going to learn from the social unrest? What are we going to learn from all the issues, political issues that we're faced at this time? How is it going to make us better? And I think as individuals, as leaders, we need to start telling those stories. We need to say, I'm better because of this time, because of this and this and this. I'm better because I stayed in a job that I felt like was killing me, because I learned a lot about myself and I saw God work. And now, difficult situations aren't that intimidating to me.
Sharon, I remember that time very well, but one of the things that I kept on relating to was this saying that comes out of the AA movement. It's just one day at a time. And I think that many times what we have to think is that all I have to figure out to get through a difficult time, a time where I feel like everything is up at the air and it's a time of flux, and what am I supposed to count on? I just have to figure out how to do the next right thing. I mean, that seems to me to be the most important issue, is saying I don't have to have it all figured out, but I do have to figure out the next constructive step. That if I'm taking on my fear, the next constructive step is not going to be to get angry at somebody. The next constructive step is not to go and numb myself out by using some kind of technology or some kind of behavior or some kind of substance. None of those things.
Or quit my job.
Or quit my job. None of those things are going to move us forward. All those things just tend to put a hold on our anxiety and our unsettledness. And that is kind of the death knell to what we're talking about. Moving forward, moving toward one another seems to be the important thing. You know, I love that scripture out of Romans, primarily because it teaches that next step, because it does say, you know, we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that sufferings bring forth endurance, character, and character eventually hope. But I always love that the first part of that is endurance. We're not a society as a whole that has built a lot of muscle. In other words, we are used to instant gratification. We're used to things working out relatively quickly. And I think COVID has been something that has required us to slow down, to realize that this cannot be solved in 1 week, 2 months, or even 1 year. It's going to take longer. And as remarkable as all the progress has been on this issue in a short amount of time when you're talking about an infectious disease, it still has gone slowly for us. When we look back at all the times that we were isolated, that we weren't able to work, when we weren't able to be with one another, that has built a sort of a mentality that the only way out is for us to live one day at a time. So for me, it's like a faithful bricklayer. You know, that each day that goes by, it's taking the one brick and putting it in the proper place and making sure that brick is level and square, so that each day when we place that brick, each day behind us is a day that we're moving in empowered ways toward what we can do, not lamenting what we can't do. Empower ourselves by moving toward people and not isolating ourselves. And really the idea of really rejoicing in that endurance itself is building the muscle that I need to get to that point where I actually have a character that is patient, that is calming, that is good. And gang, I really feel that this is the answer to some of the larger issues that have been exposed as a result of this global pandemic. Most of the fights that we have, particularly over social justice, mask wearing, the kind of music that we have in church, whether we meet in church or we meet outside or we meet online, one of the issues that I think that we've really lost is this idea of just piling one good brick on another and enduring the idea that the simple connection of daily tasks, of saying that I care for you, that in my sense that I am loved for who I am, and what I can become moves me toward loving you for who you are and what you can become. And I think that that keeps us moving toward one another, where instead of ending up over multiple issues of opinion, of belief that drives us apart, we move toward one another. That ultimately, I think, is the answer to unsettledness. And that turns that endurance into that character that you're talking about, and actually leads us to that ultimate goal of having hope for the future.
You know, I like what you're saying now, because I think as a leader in my business world, as a participant in my church, as the different places of leadership, the more simple we can make things, the easier it is to make change. And I think if we could, maybe, I don't know, maybe this is too simple, but if we could say, there's this one question for you as a leader to deal with this idea of everybody feels unsettled, whether that's leading your family or leading your church or leading your business, is am I actively working to help people move towards one another? Or is what I'm actively doing actually causing people to pull back and divide from one another? I don't know. Is that too simple?
I don't think it is too simple. I think the idea to ask yourself in every action that you take, every belief that you hold, every idea that you have, is this going to result in me moving toward people, reconciling with people, being able to hold people closer, or is it going to move us further apart?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to think about it that way. You know, we've talked through these ideas of what we can do to help people and as leaders. I just kind of wanted to go back through those ideas one more time. Is this whole idea of understanding and the concepts that everyone is basically feeling unsafe, and that what we as leaders can look for or help in understanding people's unsafety is this idea of predictability, openness and honesty, and justice are really important in understanding why everyone feels so unsettled. And then the tips that we gave to kind of be helpful in how do you make those things happen is that number one, we think about ourselves. We think about, am I myself unsettled? And if I'm not, how do I get there? Number two, we've got to separate our identity from our opinion and fully embrace who we are in Christ, regardless of what our opinion is about all these issues that we're dealing with. We've got to help empower people and help people understand that even in all situations, they have some power to do something that can be helpful. We need to help others learn that they are not alone. And in the mental health field today, the answer to almost every mental health concern, be it addiction or anxiety or depression, is that we feel that we're connected to other people and we aren't living life alone. And then we want to help people see these hard experiences as growth opportunities that in the long run will give us hope. And as we do that, we want to be moving people towards one another, to really minister to one another. And what a greater place do we have than the church and us as Christians and as believers in the body of Christ, regardless of what that looks like, to help people move together, to love one another, to bear one another's burdens, and to experience life together. So we thank you for this opportunity. We've had to share these things with you today. As I said before, please consider the Boone Center for the Family as a resource if you're struggling with some of these issues. And our Relate Strong program and our Relationship IQ program are strong in relationship building. So thank you so much.